Hello and welcome to another episode of Lost in the Dark podcast. I am Burton coming at you from the crypt, and we are back tonight with a very special episode, the third episode in our new series, Heavy Metal Folklore, where we take a look at some folklore surrounding bands themselves, or maybe just like a band's name, and the folklore surrounding the band name and where they got it and everything, such as tonight's case, where we focus on Whitechapel, where they got their name and the circumstances surrounding the events of the Whitechapel murders. Especially considering they just had a big album release. The Valley just came out, so definitely be sure to check that out. But we will get more into the band a little bit later. This one is a pretty wild one. It's definitely one of the more graphic, that's for sure. So yeah, buckle in. Let's as always here at Lost in the Dark, we start off with a drink tonight. As it's been the last few episodes, it's me and the Jägermeister. So here we are. Cheers, everyone. Cheers to Whitechapel, the band on their new release. Okay. And you know what? Let's just preemptively pour another one because this is a heavy case. I'm gonna need another one at some point. Researching this was crazy. I didn't know this much, about these murders. I knew the headlines, but not as much now. So I'd like to start off by setting the scene for you, give you an image of what it was like in Whitechapel in the 1800s. Keeping in mind that these murders took place in the 1880s, I think 1888 and 89. So yeah, let's set the scene a little bit. Whitechapel is located near the London docks, making it popular for immigrants and the working class, and by the early 1800s, due to more businesses opening, it became a more crowded and polluted area. It was located outside of the city limits of London, so the police presence wasn't very strong, especially when you consider the growing population of Whitechapel at the time. By the 1840s, it became ridden with disease, homeless, poverty, crime, and etc. And in these times, pretty much everyone only worked in the docks or in the factories, and women weren't allowed to work in either, so they were more or less especially vulnerable to these hard times. It was extremely difficult to support yourself, let alone if you were a single woman with children. A single mother. It would have been extraordinarily difficult. So, as a result, many of them turned to prostitution and sex work. And then by 1888, the London police estimated that there were 62 active brothels and 1,200 prostitutes within Whitechapel. Whitechapel earned a bad reputation and was considered to have the worst streets anywhere near London, including London. All this led up and gave way to an active serial killer running rampant through their streets, who became known as Jack the Ripper. Now, there are the Ripper files, okay? And in the Ripper files, there are some murders that aren't necessarily considered to have been done by Jack the Ripper, but they're in the Ripper files anyway, because maybe it's just an unsolved case with some similarities and stuff like that. But to give you continue to give you an idea of what was going on at the time, it's Tuesday, April 3rd, 1888. Emma Elizabeth Smith, she was a prostitute, attacked, gang raped, and robbed. However, she survived her attack and made it back to her lodge house, which was, I think, a term for brothel at the time. She told, I think, like her boss, that she had been attacked by 3 men, and one of them was young. And at the hospital, she developed an infection from an injury. They found that there was a blunt object that was forced into her vagina, rupturing her perineum, and she got an infection from that injury and died the following day. She would be identified as the first Jack the Ripper murder victim. However, newspapers reported that she was a victim of the High Rip gang, and these were gangs that would extort protection money from prostitutes at the time. Again, she herself identified her attackers as 3 different men, not just one, and the rest of the Ripper murders would eventually come to be considered to have been done by one lone killer. That was April, and then in August, the body of Martha Tabram on August 7th, the body of Martha Tabram was discovered. She was stabbed 39 times, and 2 witnesses reported seeing her in the company of 2 soldiers that evening. Police believed that it was one of her customers that killed her, but to this day it is unsolved. And then, less than a month later, on Friday, August 31st, Mary Ann Polly Nichols' body was discovered. Her throat was cut twice, and many more slashes to her abdomen. Many believe this was the first true killing of Jack the Ripper. Just over a week later, on Saturday, September 8th, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered. She went to see a client at 2 a.m., and she was found at 6 a.m. And around 5:30 a.m., a witness saw her speaking to a man in his 40s, taller than her, dark hair, dark complexion, dark overcoat, and like a Sherlock Holmes hat, one of those deerstalker hats. Another witness reported hearing voices at around 5:30 a.m. before hearing something heavy fall on the fence. She had had her throat cut like Nichols, but Annie had been disemboweled. Her intestines were pulled out and thrown over each of her shoulders, and part of her uterus was also missing. It's at this point that citizens began to panic. So already there are a number of murders deep. Whether or not they were all Jack the Ripper, there's been a number of recent murders. And citizens request police support, and they also blame the police for allowing, for their lack of presence and allowing these type of murders, allowing an environment to exist for these type of murders to take place. The public even hired private detectives to figure out who it was, and at one point, somehow a rumor got started that the police were holding a suspect, so a mob formed in front of the police station, but that was a false, that wasn't true at the time, so the mob was just kind of disbanded. But to give you an idea of how anxious the public was about what was happening in their city at this point. 2 days after Annie's death, there was an arm that was pulled out of the Thames River, which is about 8 kilometers away from Whitechapel. However, at this time, there was another active serial killer in the area, and that killer became known as the Thames Torso Killer. Now, I tell you that for a reason, but hold on one second. On September 27th, a letter arrives at the news agency and is immediately forwarded to Scotland Yard. It arrived on September 27th. It was dated September 25th. I will read you the letter. Quote, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about the leather apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work, the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear from me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope, haha. The next job I do shall clip the ladies' ears off and send them to police officers, just for a jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. P.S. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. He literally wrote ha ha. Now, for the first time, authorities had a name for their suspect. He named himself Jack the Ripper. Some think that he sent this letter to begin with because the arm had been found and he didn't want anyone giving anyone else credit for his work. That's why some believe he started sending letters like these. Now, 3 days after the letter was received, 2 more bodies would be found. Both killed on the same day, Sunday, September 30th. Elizabeth Stride was found with her throat cut, like the others. Investigators believe she was killed just moments before she was found. Many believe he was interrupted, which is why he claimed a second victim on the very same day. Catherine Eddowes was found about a 12-minute walk from Elizabeth. Her throat, too, had been slashed. Her face, though, was mutilated. Her intestines were ripped out and put over her shoulders, and her left kidney and uterus were removed. The following day, the news agency received a postcard. Quote, "I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jack's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off, had not the time to get the ears for the police. Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper." End quote. All of the references in the postcard, everything said in the postcard referenced directly to the murders that had just obviously taken place, and even said I was interrupted, basically, on the first one. However, some doubt the authenticity of the letters at all, to begin with. Some believe that they were just newspaper men with insider access information on the case, and they wrote the letters to sell more papers. So it's entirely possible that, none of them were authentic. It's very, but, I don't know. I don't know about that. Yeah, maybe, but also maybe not. I don't know. That's another thing about this case. It's one of the most classically unsolved cases in history. It's probably the most famous unsolved case in history. Now, officially, like I said, there's I think there's like 8 or 9, maybe 10 victims in the Ripper files. However, only 5 are officially credited to Jack the Ripper: Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and finally, Mary Jane Kelly. She is believed to be the final killing of Jack the Ripper. After her husband died, she moved around a bit and ended up in Whitechapel as a prostitute. On November 8th, 1888, at about 2 a.m., she was seen on the street being approached by a wealthy-looking man, and they left walking towards her room. Her friend arrived home, in the same house. Her friend arrived home at around 2:45, and all was quiet. Another neighbor said they heard someone leaving the residence at around 5:45 a.m. On November 9th, 1888, her landlord sent his assistant to collect the 6-week overdue rent. At 10:45 a.m., when he arrived, is when her body was discovered. And then when there's an account of when the police arrived. One of them, this is how they described the man that discovered her body. "The poor fellow was so frightened that for a time he was unable to utter a single intelligible word. At last he managed to stammer out something about, quote, 'Another one. Jack the Ripper. Awful. Jack McCarthy sent me.' End quote." That's what I believe the police described the man who discovered her body when they got there, before they actually saw what happened. Now, I assume that most, if not all, of our listeners are over the age of 18. So I don't usually, hold back or give any sort of warning, but some people don't like bloody stuff, and that's what's about to happen here. So if gore makes you queasy, I don't want to make you throw up or anything. So, this one's heavy. What I'm actually going to do now is read the official doctor's notes upon discovering Mary Jane Kelly's body. This is straight from the medical examiner. All right? And I'm actually going to do here, before we get into this madness, I'm going to do another Jaeger shot. Cheers, my listeners. Okay. Also, I do want to mention that I'm quoting straight from, like I said, the medical examiner's report. So I'm going to use some old-timey medical words just to give you a heads up. If I stumble on anything or you hear anything, a weird word, that's why. I just wanted to give a quick note of that. But according to his notes, quote, the body was lying naked in the middle of the bed, the shoulders flat, but the axis of the body inclined to the left side of the bed. The head was turned on the left cheek. The left arm was close to the body, with the forearm flexed at a right angle and lying across the abdomen. The right arm was slightly abducted from the body and rested on the mattress. The elbow bent and the forearm supine with the fingers clenched. The legs were wide apart, the left thigh at right angles to the trunk and the right forming an obtuse angle with the pubes. The whole of the surface of the abdomen and thighs was removed, and the abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The breasts were cut off, the arms mutilated by several jagged wounds, and the face hacked beyond recognition of the features. The tissues of the neck were severed all around down to the bone. The viscera were found in various parts, viz. The uterus and kidneys, with one breast under the head, the other breast by the right foot, the liver between the feet, the intestines by the right side, and the spleen by the left side of the body. The flaps removed from the abdomen and thighs were on the table. The bed clothing at the right corner was saturated with blood, and on the floor beneath was a pool of blood covering about 2 square feet. The face was gashed in all directions, the nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears being partly removed. The lips were blanched and cut by several incisions running obliquely down to the chin. There were numerous cuts extending irregularity across all the features. The neck was cut through to the skin and other tissues down to the vertebra, the 5th and 6th being deeply notched. The skin cuts in the front of the neck showed distinct agemosis. The air passage was cut at a lower part of the larynx. Both breasts were more or less removed by circular incisions, the muscle down to the ribs being attached to the breast. The intercostals between the 4th, 5th, and 6th ribs were cut through, and the contacts of the thorax were visible through the openings. The skin and tissues of the abdomen from the costal arch to the pubes were removed in 3 large flaps. The right thigh was denuded in front to the bone, the flap of skin including the external organs of generation and part of the right buttock. The left thigh was stripped of skin, fascia, and muscles as far as the knee. The left calf showed a long gash through skin and tissues to the deep muscles and reached from the knee to 5 inches above the ankles. Both forearms had extensive jagged wounds. The right thumb showed a small superficial incision about 1 inch long, with an extravasation of blood in the skin and several aberrations on the back of the hand, moreover showing the same condition. Upon opening the thorax, it was found that the right lung was minimally adherent by old firm adhesions. The lower part of the lung was broken and torn away. Left lung was intact. It was adherent to the apex, and there were a few adhesions over the side in the substance of the lung. There were several nodules of consolidation. The peridium was open below and the heart absent. In the abdominal cavity, there was some partially digested food of fish and potatoes, and similar food was found in the remains of the stomach attached to the intestines. This one was by far, end quote. But this one was by far the most horrific of all of the crimes attributed to Jack the Ripper. Likely because he had time. He didn't do it out in the open. So, and based on witness reports that I said earlier, he literally took all night cutting and mutilating his final victim. or at least the last one officially attributed to him. The doctor believed she was killed with a throat slash, so the rest of her mutilation was post-mortem, and that it would have taken upwards of 2 hours to perform the cuts and wounds he saw on the body. After Kelly, there were a few more murders that were rumored to be linked to Jack. Rose Millay, but she had been strangled, and some even think she accidentally hung herself when she was drunk, like got caught on something. But there's never been a conclusion to her case. Regardless, her case was put in the Ripper files. Also, Alice McKenzie was found with her throat cut and wounds to the abdomen like Jack would do. However, investigators couldn't tell if it was an authentic Jack killing or if they had a copycat killer on their hands. Then, sometime later, another torso was found. However, Jack the Ripper scholars believe it to be the work of the Thames torso killer that I mentioned earlier, and that was in fact a separate serial killer, and the Thames torso killer and Jack the Ripper are in fact not one and the same due to their different profiles and styles of killing, but it's interesting because you got to keep in mind this is 1888, 89, 90, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have serial killer profiling in the FBI until I think like the 60s. So it's hard to say. And why can't a serial killer essentially have more than one profile? I don't know. I thought it was I didn't dive deep into the Thames torso killer, so I don't know much about that one other than some of his killings seem to overlap with Jack the Ripper. In any case, the final murder in the Jack the Ripper files occurred on Friday, February 13th, Friday the 13th, in 1891. Frances Coles was found with her throat slit, signs of a struggle before the slashing, and no further mutilation to her body. There was one suspect in the case that they interviewed and even tried to link to the Ripper killings, but due to lack of evidence, they had to let him go and no charges were ever brought against him. However, while these were included in the official Jack the Ripper files, like I said, none of them concluded that they were Ripper killings, for sure. And now we move on to our suspects. Now, here's the thing. This case at this point is almost 150 years old. It's probably the most famous unsolved case in history and has a longer list of possible suspects than probably any other unsolved case. It seems like every single year there is a plethora of new books, movies, and TV shows and History Channel documentaries claiming to have solved the case of Jack the Ripper. And most recently, I even remember seeing something for one recently about claiming that H.H. Holmes is the true identity of Jack the Ripper. So literally every year someone has a new theory claiming they've solved the case. So narrowing down suspects or even picking any to talk about on this podcast is a task on its own. I could do an entire episode alone just dedicated to Jack the Ripper suspects, and I wouldn't even scratch the surface. In this episode, I'm really trying strictly to stick to what happened in Whitechapel and those 5 murders that are officially attributed to the serial killer Jack the Ripper, and essentially putting Whitechapel on the map and eventually leading to the band being named after it. But I will give you some idea of what's going on. During the time of the killings, the police believed the crimes were carried out by one of the local high-rip gangs. That theory was written off because they believed, due to the intensity of the crimes and the publicity that they were getting, that someone would have sold someone out. Someone would have came forward with information. One of the gang members would have sold one of the other gang members out, is what the police believe. So they wrote it off because no one sold anybody out, basically. Now, by the time Annie Chapman was murdered on September 8th, 1888, the police felt that they were looking for a lone suspect. So by that time, they had written off the idea of the gang theory. Police vetted a long list of suspects who were in the medical field and in the slaughter industry, so like butchers and people that work at slaughterhouses and things like that. They did this under the impression that the killer may have some medical or butchering background. However, ultimately, not only could they not identify any suspects, but they never actually came to an official conclusion on whether or not the killer had any such experience. In fact, the initial medical examiner was later quoted in saying that he didn't think the killer had any sort of medical background whatsoever, and furthermore didn't even possess the experience behind the blade held by a butcher in a butcher shop, essentially. So the actual medical examiner who examined the final victim, the quote that I read earlier, he didn't believe that whoever committed that crime had any sort of official experience with a blade, that from a butcher or a medical professional. The police also investigated whether or not the killer was local and conducted over 2,000 interviews. 300 people were actually investigated during this process. 80 people were actually detained. And Jack the Ripper could have very well been one of those people. Lacking any sort of concrete evidence, it prevented the police from bringing any charges against anyone at all. So they ultimately had to let everyone go. So here we are, almost 150 years later, still unsolved. And it's almost like every single time someone throws out a new theory, it almost just makes the puzzle larger, you know what I mean, as opposed to smaller, which is what it should be doing, you know what I mean? It's almost 150 years later. The suspect list, as I mentioned earlier, is probably in the thousands at this point, ranging from anyone from H.H. Holmes to the fucking Freemasons. The Freemasons were even accused once of being Jack the Ripper, and everyone that you could imagine in between. And as I said earlier, there have been hundreds of movies, TV shows, documentaries, books, everything. Every sort of pop culture avenue one could take to tell a story about Jack the Ripper has been taken. And the myth and folklore surrounding the Whitechapel crimes, all of it, has been examined, looked at, talked about, and produced almost to death. However, considering all that, it wasn't until February 2006 in a little town in Tennessee called Knoxville that residents and future beasts Phil Bozeman, Brandon Cagle, and Ben Savage came together. Not long later, adding Alex Wade, Gabe Crisp, and Derek Martin to form a band that would go on to be known as the Godfathers of Deathcore, Whitechapel, named for the Ripper killings. In 2007, they signed to Siege of Amida Records in the UK and Candlelight Records in North America. And under those labels, they released their first album, The Somatic Defilement. And it's on this initial release that they go deepest into the Jack the Ripper folklore in the album and the songwriting. And in fact, Phil Bozeman once gave an interview or maybe just typed out the meaning behind songs on pretty much the first three albums, but it's the first album that features most heavily on Jack the Ripper. And to quote Phil, The Somatic Defilement is a concept album based on Jack the Ripper, which a lot is fairy tale songs. And I'll go through and read what he says about each song. First song, The Somatic Defilement. This song is a fabrication of the mind of Jack the Ripper. The song puts the work of him with the work of many serial killers. They crave power through the dead. Next song is Divergenation Studies. This song is along the same lines, but goes off the theme of female-driven killers, much like Jack the Ripper. Again, this is me putting myself into their head. Next song, Prostatic Fluid Asphyxiation. Again, this song is driven by female serial killers. The power they feel and long for is explained through sexual pleasures that they have at their disposal. Next song, Fairy Faye. In this song, the story of Fairy Faye, a woman murdered but never proven to be one of the victims. Some say she never existed, and this is a fabrication of the murder. Hence the line, the confidential lick of my tongue will be taken to the grave and never be seen again. Next song, Ear to Ear. Again, the song speaks for itself. Pretty much every victim had their throats cut and severed violently by Jack the Ripper. Ear to Ear is also kind of a reference to the Chelsea Grin from the Black Dahlia murder victim, like the actual murder, which we talked about on a previous Heavy Metal Folklore episode. Next song, Alone in the Morgue. This song has nothing to do with Jack the Ripper. This song is a simple song about a coroner who is a demented necrophiliac. The song speaks for itself. Next song, Festering Fiesta. This song focuses on more of a Jeffrey Dahmer approach. His collection of rotting bodies were his keepsakes for his work beyond the point of disgusting. Next song, Vicer Exciser. The song is about a killer who thrives off watching his victims suffer and bring them to the point of being on the brink of death, but can keep them alive and aware of what is going on while they are slowly killed. The title means a bad habit to cut. Next song and final song, Articulo Mortis. The term means in the moment of death. This song is a fabrication of Jack the Ripper experiencing that moment of death with his victim and conversing with them and feelings of remorse for what he has done. So that's the Somatic Defilement. That's the first album. They would go on. That came out on July 31st, 2007. And then they would go on to release 6 more albums. They're on their 7th album, which came out on March 29th, 2019, called The Valley. But I think, the Semantic Defilement was the only one that was a full-on concept record about Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. Brilliant album. And absolutely fascinating topic. So honestly, that's about it in terms of the Heavy Metal Folklore episode about the Whitechapel murders. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you have enjoyed the previous episodes of Heavy Metal Folklore. We will continue to keep them coming. So far, we've kind of just focused on like band titles and kind of like Whitechapel, Black Dahlia murder, things like that. We'll be getting into some other topics sooner than later in terms of like actual folklore surrounding actual bands, as opposed to like basically describing a true crime situation. But that is to the future. Also, I did want to mention, before I wrap up, I said that there would probably be an Amon Amarth Berserker review out this week. I've decided to hold off until next week due to the fact that I'll be seeing them on Sunday with Slayer, Lamb of God, and Cannibal Corpse. If you will be at that show at DT in Clarkston, Michigan, be sure to find us. We will be, all of Lost in the Dark podcast will be there, and we will have stickers in hand for anyone who wants one. So if you see us there, be sure to say hi. You'll get a sticker for sure. And we will also be at the Motor City Comic Con on Saturday, the day before Slayer. So if you see us there, do the same. Say hi. But that's going to be about it for me. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lost in the Dark Podcast Special Edition Heavy Metal Folklore. Be sure to give us a like, a follow, a review, etc. On Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and iTunes. If you have any suggestions for future Heavy Metal Folklore episodes, if you have any paranormal experiences, dogman experiences, especially relating to Michigan, but even if not, I'd still love to hear them. Please feel free to write to us on any of the above mentioned or lostinthedarkpodcast@gmail.com. But yeah, that's going to be about it from me tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I love you all to death. Good night.